So we have Brad Nelson here with us today, and he's going to share about human intelligence and reshaping that narrative of motion and performance. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it over to you, Brad.
Thank you. Let me share my deck. And I understand that you had Anthony here last week. Anthony and I are, I'll say, two brothers from different mothers. There will be some overlap here as well. Fortunately, I couldn't make it. Yeah, as the title said, that this talk is human intelligence reshaping the narrative of motivation and performance. And if it will move forward, I'll talk a little bit about myself. And so, as your screen says in the invite, my name is Brad Nelson. I am the host of the Agile for Agilists podcast. We've been around for about 18 months now. We have 36 episodes we've released. I'm very fortunate to have had some fantastic guests like Esther Derby, James Grenning, John Kern, Daniel Vacanti, many more, I would say, less popular Agile coaches in the industry as well. We don't just try to hook up with big names, and we always talk about a topic. It's not just an interview of the person. So definitely encourage you to check it out if that sounds interesting to you. I have way too many certifications. My last company, I was a consultant, a consulting manager, and we had trainers. And as a part of them preparing to bring things to the market, I got to participate in a lot of their first training. So I haven't hunted all these certifications. Once again, was very fortunate to just work with the right people to acquire many of them, as well as the related learnings. I currently work at Ford Motor Company in the credit area, helping out their digital portfolio. And yeah, if you're from the Midwest, I've worked at pretty much all of the major Fortune 500 private companies in Michigan, Meyer, Gordon Foods, Amway, so forth. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. Also, most recently, I was pretty excited to find out that there's more and more happiness courses online. And one of them I took through Harvard X, which intended to be a 6-month program. It was 3 different courses just to try to make sure that I'm as accurate as I can be when presenting this stuff. And I'll talk more about what I'm reading now and all of that towards the end. But with that said, right, the big disclaimer, right, I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV. This content is for informational purposes. However, I have had this peer reviewed by a doctor for medical accuracy and a behavior design coach as well. As I mentioned, I want it to be as accurate as possible. I also have to throw out there, these opinions are mine, and they may or may not coincide with the organizations I'm affiliated with. And then these slides will be made available at the end. There's actually a download link. And as I mentioned, this has been peer reviewed. The note there, there's another note of where you can get information about who peer reviewed. I've also cited like 45 different citations throughout this. So if you want to fact check or do the research, it's all there. It's all in the deck for you. All right. On to the outcome of today's conversation. I say this is my used snake oil salesman slide. That's worse than just a snake oil salesman. It's a used one. And today we're going to talk about how we can improve all of your business outcomes and your personal life. And I know if you've spoken to consultants, we all say that. But I promise you that this one is more science-based than anything. And how we're going to do that is we're going to actually focus on human beings, right? Trying to understand how humans operate, which means we're going to be talking about biology and psychology. as opposed to process or work or organizations. Our organizations are made of humans, at least for now. And so it's important to understand how we operate in order to get the best performance out of ourselves, our teams, our teammates, and so on. So the first thing I want to talk about from biology are these things called neurotransmitters. And so when our neurons in our brain are firing electrical signals, they produce these things called neurotransmitters. And most of us have probably heard of these, right? Oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins. And I've put the related kind of nickname that we think of when we hear these things, right? Like serotonin's the mood booster, oxytocin is the love hormone. But these chemicals do a lot more for us than just what they're kind of known for. But we call them the feel-good hormones, and there's like a nuance there. They're not technically hormones, but they act like them. If you're wondering why, it's neurotransmitters at the top. But in particular, there's two that I really want to delve into today. There's one, dopamine, which actually enables us to keep attention or focus. It activates the learning centers of our brain, and it allows us to access and create new memories. So it's not just a reward, it helps with those things as well. And then serotonin, our mood booster, helps us with alertness or wakefulness. It's the chemical that wakes us up in the morning. It also helps us with our motivation and willpower and managing our anxiety. And so these two happiness, feel-good hormones are crucial for our performance, our mental performance. In fact, they're really, really good at this. Right? There's been over 200 scientific studies that have shown that if you have these happiness hormones actively firing in your brain, you're going to be way more successful at your job, at any task you're trying to do, at your hobbies, and even your overall health. But then we enter everyone's famous word, stress, right? If you're not familiar with stress, if you're one of the blessed people who's never heard of this, right? It's a response to mental or emotional strain, and it's a prompt to address challenges or threats in our life. And what's really important about this is that when you're stressed, we produce the stress hormone cortisol, which I also don't think is new to most people. But what I've recently learned is that cortisol actually inhibits our dopamine production. It also increases the consumption of serotonin. And so, if those are the two things that are crucial for us to perform at our best, and cortisol counters them, that's bad news. So, we want to be able to reduce stress. And stress affects us in many ways, actually. Elevated levels of cortisol is associated with weight gain, hypertension, and muscle weakness, which creates this downward spiral of constantly feeling fatigued that I'm sure a lot of us have experienced at some time or another. And in fact, up to 90% of all doctors' office visits are stress-related ailments and complaints. And even Dr. Mattei, in his studies, has even claimed that it's a major cause of all of our physical illnesses, extended elevated levels of cortisol. So it's bad news. Our brain also has this thing called neuroplasticity, and that doesn't mean it's made of plastics or microplastics. It means that our brain actually evolves structurally, like the shape of our brain changes based on how we use it. There was an interesting study a few years back in the UK, in London. They have taxi drivers. In order to become a taxi driver, you have to actually memorize the maps, and you have to take this test, and you have to pass this test. And what they did is they scanned people's brains that were going through this process before they went into the training and took the test and after. And they found that the part that's related to navigation in your brain was larger after. And it's the same thing with different, I forget the tribe. There's a tribe like in Africa, I want to say, where they don't say left and right. It's always like, your north arm or your south arm. And so they're constantly like keeping track of the direction to be able to communicate. And neuroplasticity is something that we have our entire lives. It's highest when we're young, but it's still there as adults. So our brains still evolve and change and respond throughout our entire lives. Now, when we have stress, the part of our brain responsible for stress grows, the amygdala. And so cortisol is going to promote this to grow. And so we're going to get better at being stressed, which probably isn't desirable for most people. But cortisol also does this thing where it decreases our neuroplasticity, which makes it harder for us to counteract the stress. And if you feel this way, you're not alone. Right? Half of workers are unsatisfied with their jobs. 30% find their job stressful. This is made worse by the fact that 40% of us, and I say us because I'm one of these people, finds their job central to their identity. So it impacts their personal life as well. And oops, I fat fingered. A third of adults have had depression at some time or another throughout their lives. And so now this is virtual and we have limited time. So I'll take a few minutes, but what I want us to do is open a notepad, Excel, piece of paper next to you. And this activity is called a day reconstruction activity. And the idea is you track the things that you've done throughout your day so far. Doesn't matter how menial it is. And then on a scale of 0 to 6, that's your 7-point Likert scale, kind of write, did this thing make me happy or did it not? Right? So for me, I did not get up at 6 a.m. I got up at 6:30, which still doesn't make me super happy. But drinking my coffee, I hand grind coffee every morning. I love it. It makes me feel great. It wakes me up. So if you have something ready, I'll set the timer for 2 minutes. And I want you to just kind of document for a minute these things. All right, been 2 minutes, probably not enough time to really think through this. For the sake of our time, we're going to move along. But this is an activity that I would encourage you to leverage outside of this meeting to think through what are the different things that I'm doing in my personal life and at work, and how are they affecting me. I don't think that we tend to reflect in that way. But we can take a few minutes here if anyone feels vulnerable enough to share maybe something that was surprising to them. Doesn't have to be surprising, but anyone can just unmute and share.
Yeah, so I'm I'm today I'm on vacation. I was surprising that for me, I guess like the things that gave me more happiness were work related things like chores and things like that. You know, like just being able to complete them.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great observation. Anyone else?
Yeah,
Um,
this is.
uh,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say one of the things that that brings me happiness is wrestling. I started doing it like a year ago, and so you know that makes me pretty happy. Makes me feel
Like
pretty positive.
like Greco-Roman or professional?
Yeah, like Greco, folk, freestyle.
Nice.
Yeah, I like the little things. I mean, like you said, that cup of coffee, but like I go out in the morning and I have some flowers on my front porch and I just watered them like at like 6:30 in the morning when it's really quiet outside, and then just take a deep breath and kind of take in the day to start it. And it just starts my day off happy. Nice little energy boost.
Love it.
Man, that sounds awesome. Mine's like totally different though. I am looking for a job right now, so it's really crappy, but it actually surprised me in the fact that as the years go on, because we're all in tech, we seem to change our jobs often. I'm actually enjoying interviews now, which is weird for me because I always used to dread them. So now like I've noticed my confidence in these. And what I also notice is that I'm getting more interviews now too. I haven't landed a job, but I've realized that I'm getting that confidence back. So hopefully I'll get a job. But yeah, it was surprising because nobody loves job search.
Awesome. Yeah. Fingers crossed for you. All right. Thank you everyone for sharing. Now, does anybody know what our number one cause of stress at work is?
Other people.
Other people
Saying yes to too much.
saying yes to too much? Any other guesses? Lack of
Overworking, taking on too much work.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the thing with stress is anything that you think of as stressful, it's a personal experience. It is stressful. However, research has shown at work, the number one cause of stress is a lack of control. And a lot of these things that were mentioned all kind of fall under this bucket of a lack of control. And so they found, they did a study with nurses that it didn't matter how long their shift was, the perceived level of exertion or the amount of challenges that popped up throughout the day. What mattered at the end of the day and whether they felt fatigued or stressed was whether or not they felt in control of their day. And this is a really interesting study because we're still trying to understand how like the energy of the brain and like why do we get tired and why do we need to sleep, and those are things that we don't really fully understand. And we used to think that there was like a set amount of willpower that we had per day and we used it up over time. That's not necessarily the case, as they're finding with this. It really all boils down to how our day felt to us, as far as did we feel in control of the things that were happening to us, or were we in control of the things that happened for us, right? And so definitely looks like all the things that was mentioned. It can also look like micromanaging, right? A manager that micromanage you, not having any sort of decision-making power, constant oversight from a superior, or monitoring tools. There's actually been studies that show monitoring tools, if you're a remote worker, is the exact same effect on you mentally as if a manager standing over your shoulder all day. Super strict processes, right? For our agilists, that should probably ring a bell. mandated deadlines and goals, and a lack of psychological safety. And so those are just a few examples of what a lack of control might look like at work. But the important part here is understanding that we're biologically wired to perform worse in a command and control environment. Right? So the research shows that if we feel like we're not in control, we feel stressed. Stress produces cortisol. Cortisol counteracts, right, dopamine and serotonin, which are the two chemicals responsible for performance within our brain. So now you have, scientific evidence here on top of this psychology stuff that we've had for 100 years in the Hawthorne studies that says, we perform best in a democratic environment. And when we're talking about, what does it mean to be in control? What we're really talking about is, how am I motivated? Like, what is my motivation to do the things I'm being asked to do? And when we look at motivation, there's two types of motivation as defined by Ryan and DC. There's controlled motivation, which should be an indicator. It's extrinsic things. So do I expect to receive a reward or punishment for doing these things? And then there's what's called autonomous motivation or intrinsic. And there's three kind of buckets for what intrinsically motivates us. And once again, it's control, it's competence, and it's connection. If you're familiar with Dan Pink, he has kind of changed these to be autonomy, mastery, and purpose. But it's the same thing. He's pulling from DC and Ryan. And so let's talk about these a little bit more. So autonomous motivation is greater than controlled motivation. Right? We found that intrinsically motivated or autonomous motivated employees are 3 times more engaged at work. Positive extrinsic motivators, so these controlled motivators, lose effectiveness and can diminish engagement over time. So those are things like a bonus or a pay raise or a promotion or a PIP, right? Or getting in trouble. Right? So, and then, as I mentioned, the last I mentioned, those are negative extrinsic motivators, which are going to produce stress. So, as we know, that's not desirable. And what we learned, right, as I mentioned, we want to promote intrinsic motivation. And so understanding what does it mean to feel in control of your situation from an intrinsic motivation standpoint, we're really talking about empowerment. And we tend to use that word a lot. You're empowered to do this, but you can't just tell someone they're empowered. It doesn't work that way. And they need the ability to be empowered, which means they need the ability to self-manage themselves in their work. They need the knowledge. How do I do this work? And they need the resources here to do it. And I'm not saying people resources. I'm talking about the actual things required, the tools required to do the work. If I hire a developer and they don't have a computer to program on, they don't have the resources to do the work, right? That's a silly example, but those are the things we need to think about. And then once they have the ability, they actually need the authority. Right? We can't just tell somebody they're empowered. They need to actually be able to act on that. And so the delegation ladder is a great example of that, where essentially we need to teach people what it means to have different levels of authority. Right? If you have someone like, a toddler, right, and you're just like, hey, the kitchen is yours, free to use it as you like, they're either going to sit on the floor and not know what to do, or they're going to, burn the house down. So we need to work on maturing people's ability to have authority over time. And I forget all the levels, but essentially it's like first we sell, and then like we advise them, and then we come to equal agreement on a situation, and then they come to us for advice, and then they just make sure we're aware, and then they're fully delegated. Kind of how the ladder works. And so the idea is you want to work your employees through that ladder to be able to teach them how to effectively have authority. That also requires guardrails and expectations. And if I'm like, you're 100% empowered to do whatever you want, and then every time you do something, you get in trouble, right? That's not ideal either. So it's really important to have guardrails. And then obviously none of that's possible if you don't have psychological safety to feel comfortable making mistakes and making decisions. The next intrinsic motivator is competence, which is one of the reasons why you're all here, I assume, right? Is you want to grow in your mastery. It's important to remember that organizations only learn through individuals who learn. Right? Our organizations aren't entities in of themselves, at least not yet. And so we need to promote learning within people. And growth is a natural human need. We all have a desire to grow in certain areas, maybe not wider physically, but in skills. It's the reason why people practice the guitar, even if they never have an intention of playing in a band or going professional, or it's why people might draw in their free time or garden. And it's a natural human need. And then back to that neuroplasticity thing, right? The more we do certain things, the better we get at those things. So the more we learn, the better we get at learning. So that's going to promote our brain health. And there's even things you can do called neurobics, which is stepping outside of your comfort zone, because our brain is really efficient and it builds these neural pathways where we just kind of automatically respond to things in ways that we've always responded. And most of us probably don't have to think about brushing our teeth. Once we get started, we just kind of go into autopilot and think about our day or whatever else is going on. And so a perfect example would be to try brushing your teeth with your non-dominant hand. Right? Even something like that, it's different. It draws attention to your brain to say like, hey, I need to pay attention. This isn't the same old, same old. And there's a whole book on a bunch of stuff like this and different things that you can do just for brain health in general, but also to increase your ability to learn. And then research shows that when we focus on people's strengths, it boosts productivity up to 18%. And then the last intrinsic motivator is connectedness or relatedness, as DC calls it. And we found that social support is a key predictor of happiness and life expectancy, how long you're going to live for. We also know that in America, we have an epidemic of loneliness, as they've been saying over the last few years. So it's even more important because interacting with others reduces pain, anxiety, and stress while boosting our mood through one of those other neurotransmitters we haven't really talked a lot about yet, called oxytocin. We also know that employees with workplace friends are more engaged, productive, reliable, innovative, all that stuff. So it pays to have friends at work. And collective intelligence and team learning strongly correlated with diverse cognitive styles and inclusivity. They want to create an inclusive workplace to promote connectedness. And we also know that the collective intelligence has been shown to outperform individual intelligence. So it doesn't matter how smart an individual is. If you have a team with the right environment, they will outperform. This is really important for us as individuals. It's also really important for us, in the workplace. And so far, we've talked about more of like the work environment and things to counteract stress or to prevent us from losing our happiness hormones. But there are many things you can do to promote happiness. And we'll touch on a few of them here. So we do actually know how to promote happiness within our lives. Some people may think otherwise, but we do. We have the research now. Unfortunately, it's not just one thing. I can't tell you just go eat that cookie and you'll be happy. It's what Dr. Alex Korb calls an upward spiral. So think of downward spiral, but in the inverse. It's a bunch of little things that we have to do that have an exponential effect the more we do. And that's how we create what's called this upward spiral of happiness. But happiness in our personal lives is also intrinsic. It's also internal. So only 10% of long-term happiness can be predicted by external factors, which goes against kind of the societal norm and what we've all been taught by our parents, by school, by our work, right? It's, you know, if you achieve the thing, you'll be happy. If I get the good grades, then I can be happy. If I get the job, then I can be happy. If I get the promotion, then I can be happy. You know, if I have the house with the white picket fence and I drive a Cadillac, which I have all those things, then I'll be happy. I'll tell you, it did not make me happy. And in fact, it can have the opposite effect because we expect to feel happy once we get these things and it doesn't live up to our expectations. And then it can actually make us feel worse. And so, what Sean Aker teaches is that we really have the equation backwards. If we're happy, then we will get all the things. And as we talked about at the beginning of this, the reason for that is those chemicals, those happiness chemicals are what enable us to perform at our best. And so we need to shift from these external factors that drive happiness to these more intrinsic internal factors. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by understanding this thing called a reticular active system, RAS. You don't have to remember the name, but what's important to know is that it's this system in our brain that filters out our surroundings. Without it, we couldn't perform. We couldn't do anything. We would be overwhelmed with everything that's going on to our senses at any given time. And it naturally functions in a way that it identifies what's important enough to us to catch our attention. So if I'm sitting here talking and a car drives by, which actually just happened, normally I wouldn't even notice because I'm focused on presenting. But if, I don't know, an airplane crashes into part of my house, that would catch my attention. It's also the reason why if you're in a crowded room and it's really noisy and someone yells your name and it catches your attention, because your brain is able to filter that out at like a subconscious level. And so while we can't control how we respond to things or how things make us feel, we can actually train our reticular active system over time to identify what's important to us. One way that we can do that is through looking for the positive in our lives. And so that's not to say like, hey, ignore everything that's bad that's happening to me, or to like gaslight yourself. What you're really doing is you're looking for the things that already exist today that you're grateful for. Through years of evolution, we naturally look at the negatives in our lives because that is what's enabled us to survive. I identified the saber-toothed tiger. That's the threat. So I'm going to run from that. And I noticed that. I didn't notice the butterflies there on the flowers. And so we need to retrain that. And one way you can do that is just by documenting every day a few things you're grateful for. And it's actually serves a double purpose because as you're documenting them, you're reliving those things as well, which helps produce more dopamine and serotonin. And then the other thing is meditation. Studies have shown that just over 6 to 8 weeks, you're able to actually change the parts of your brain, the amygdala that we talked about earlier. You're able to actually shrink it from 30 minutes a day of meditation. And then, I always forget what it's called. It's something cortex, is the part of the brain that processes emotions that actually gets bigger. And so that neuroplasticity, our brain actually evolves from meditation to better regulate our emotions and to not produce as much stress. It is not the prefrontal cortex. It starts with a C. I even read it like right before talking and I still forgot it. But it's in the notes. Yep, that is the part of our brain for decision. The other thing that you can do is you can take a break throughout your day. And so Microsoft, just a couple of years ago, hooked up some of their employees with this really cool looking EEG cap in the bottom left there. And they scanned their brains throughout the day. And what they found was that stress compounds. It builds on itself. And so you'll see here in the top where there was no breaks throughout the day. In meeting 1, they started to have stress. Meeting 2, it was even more stress that built on it, and 3 and so on. And then they took those same people and they introduced breaks throughout their day. And you're able to see in the bottom that they were able to essentially baseline, keep a baseline all day of their stress levels. And so the idea here is that you want to introduce 10-minute breaks throughout your day. And the thing that they did is they had them meditate just as a control, so that they're all doing the same thing. You don't have to meditate. You can go for a walk, stretch your legs, get a bite to eat. But meditation, as we talked about on the previous slide, is something that definitely could help as well. And then the two largest predictors of happiness and overall life expectancy, the first one we already talked about is interacting with others. So we touched on oxytocin. Our body produces that. We call it the love hormone. It's not just when we're in love with someone or we're intimately touching someone. Just interacting with people produces oxytocin. And oxytocin shares the same receptors with serotonin. And so it can give you the same feeling. It also reduces your pain, anxiety, and stress. And it activates the centers responsible for social interactions. So not only do you have the neuroplasticity that makes you better at it, but oxytocin in the moment makes you even better at socializing. So as you release the oxytocin, you get better at it. And as a reminder, interacting with people at work and having friends at work is key to employee engagement. The other largest predictor of happiness and overall life expectancy is mobility. And so we know that sedentary behaviors, which most of us have if you work remote, increases our all-cause mortality risk by 20 to 30%. Some people even called it the new smoking. I had that in here, and as I mentioned, it was peer-reviewed by a doctor, and she was like, yeah, you can't say that. She was like, smoking is the smoking. But it is definitely the biggest problem that we have now, that we've cut back on a lot of smoking. And once again, this is informational purposes only. I am not your doctor. Please talk to your doctor if you are feeling depressed. But regular exercise can be as effective as medication for treating depression. Interacting with animals. There's a question in chat here. Sorry. It was Brad, you mentioned numerous times about interacting with people. How does interacting with animals, dogs, cats, impact your stress levels? It's the same thing. It produces oxytocin as well. And then what we're essentially talking about throughout this whole thing is introducing habits. Right? The upward spiral is changing habits, and that's really hard to do. If knowledge of smoking is bad for you was enough, we wouldn't have any smokers at all. So what we want to do if we're looking to introduce some new habits into our lives, and there's many more in the upward spiral, I just want to touch on that. Those are just a few that I highlighted. There's a lot more out there. But what we want to do is we want to take advantage of the brain again when we're trying to form new habits. And so that dopamine, the reward chemical that we get, we want to try to produce as much of that as possible when we're doing a new thing. And so find a way to celebrate the thing that you're doing, whether it's a little silly dance, whether it's high-fiving yourself in the mirror, giving yourself a smile. All those things may be silly, but they do actually produce dopamine. Anything you can do. Maybe it's something a little bit more elaborate. That's okay. Whatever makes you feel good. And when we think about a behavior becomes more automatic when you feel a positive emotion or the relief from a negative one. Once again, it goes to dopamine. I want to feel something, a positive emotion related to this thing I'm doing. And that's why sometimes you can do something one time. Like I had chocolate ice cream one time, and then now I want chocolate ice cream every single day. One time positive emotion, or it might be multiple times to build a habit. And the biggest trick is don't get caught up in perfecting the new change. That's something that a lot of us struggle with, myself in particular. I tend to be more of a perfectionist. And, every new year, I'm like, I'm going to get in shape this year. And so in order to get in shape, I'm going to start reading all the articles. I'm going to start watching all the YouTube videos. I'm going to create the most elaborate workout plan. I'm going to buy the gym membership. I'm going to go on Mondays and do these exercise. Wednesdays, do these exercise. And it's not enough. I got to change my diet. Here's my whole diet plan as well to go with that. And it becomes overwhelming and daunting. And then I mess up one time and it's like, oh, well, that day's done. I guess I'll just have to wait until tomorrow. Instead, if I just walked into the living room and did one squat or lifted a can of soup, like I have done more exercise than I was doing before. And then that feeds into the last point here, which is focus on the small changes. We're all agilists, or most of us, I assume, here are agilists. Apply that to this as well, right? Make small changes. Decrease the time between those dopamine hits, right? And then also reduce the effort and increase your ability. So what that might look like is if you want to do a gratitude journal every night before bed, put the gratitude journal on your nightstand. Because then it's there. It's a prompt. You'll see it and it will remind you to do it. But then you don't find yourself laying in bed going, oh, it's going to journal, but I forgot it. It's across the room or I don't know where it is. It's there. It's ready for you. So you're reducing that effort, which increases your ability to do it. So to summarize what we ran through today at a bit of a high level, is that the feel-good hormones or the happiness hormones are responsible for our brain's performance. Stress hormones shut down those feel-good hormones. And the number one cause of stress at work is a lack of control. Right? If those are the three things I want you to walk away with, if nothing else. They're very important for our performance at work. And if you want to learn more, the happiness advantage was really the first thing that kicked off all of this for me. It was a bit of a personal journey as an Agile consultant. And as I mentioned, I achieved all the things, the Cadillac, the picket fence, the job. And I was like, wow, this still kind of sucks. I wonder why that is. He has a fantastic TED Talk that's over 10 years old now that I encourage you to look up, called the same thing. All of the science, the chemicals, the parts of the brain, and then some, all come from The Upward Spiral by Alex Korb. And then if you want to learn a little bit better about behavior design and why people do things or how to incrementally change, Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg is fantastic. And there's a lot of other books that talk about this. Many of them are in the citations of this presentation. One that I'm reading right now is, I forget which one it is. I want to say Huga. It's by this guy by the name of Mike Viking, which is like the coolest name ever. He's a Scandinavian guy that started like the first ever positive psychology institute, and he's got many books. So like that's one thing I'm reading now. But there are many, many books on this subject. So this was from an interview of will.i.am, and I think it's really powerful stuff. And it's where the name of this talk actually came from, just human intelligence. And I think it's interesting. I usually joke I take all my sage advice from will.i.am. I don't normally, admittedly, follow Will, but I saw this interview because he was starting a startup for AI, and they're asking him his thoughts on AI. And you know, if you work in a company right now, you're probably aware that they're pouring tons and tons of money into AI. But how much are we actually spending on the things in this talk, better understanding humans and how humans operate and how we perform at our best? From my experience working with many companies as a consultant, it's zero. Zero on this sort of stuff and quite limited on other things related to maybe like servant leadership. Right? Most companies now are aware of Simon Sinek, so you'll see him in some talks, but that's pretty much where it ends. Those are my parting thoughts. Thank you. As I mentioned, the slides are available to you. You can use my short URL, guac/hi. You can scan the QR code. Please add me on LinkedIn. Ask me questions anytime about this or other things. And as I mentioned, this was peer-reviewed by Dr. Raquel Garzon. If you like this talk and you would like to leverage some of her services, she liked it so much. So I didn't know her at all. I went searching for a doctor to peer review this for me. that had the related expertise. And so I found her. She graciously agreed to review it, liked it so much that she said, if you're interested in any of her talks on it, that she would give you a 20% code if you just mention my name. So cool. That is it. Now I will open to any questions or comments.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Brad. We have a couple questions in the chat. David asked, but having to make decisions also produces stress. No?
It can. Yeah. I mean, especially there's like decision fatigue. Everything's a balance, right? So if you don't get to make any decisions ever, that would also be stressful. And I guess the other thing I would say is like, do you feel in control of the decisions you have to make? And so,
No, if I could do the follow up, but I was thinking on this talk on happiness where they made the experiment where they told people in the control, be like, hey, you cannot change your decision, and then they said to other people, you can change the decision anytime, and then people regretted their decision more than the ones that couldn't take back their decision. And I was thinking, like, is this like a lesson for being able to failing forward or something? Just trying to compare this with what you said, like, of being in control make us unhappy, not being in control make us unhappy.
yeah, that's interesting. I've seen that study too. Just like there's the decision bias of, people have to choose something, and then once they chose it, they become biased towards that one, and that was obviously the best one because they chose it. And they even did an interesting study with paintings where they showed people paintings, they made them choose one, then they waited like a month and then mailed them a different painting, and they still were like, I got the best painting, because of the decision bias. I don't have a great answer. It's interesting. It's interesting stuff.
We have a couple other comments related to that one. I don't know. I guess I'll read them out and we see if we want to dive in or move on. But Damien argued that for some people, having more autonomy meant more responsibility and accountability and having to make more important decisions, which could lead to stress. So he said, some people are more comfortable with less responsibility and just tell me what you want me to do mindset.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so it's, once again, it's a balance. It's the right level of autonomy for you. I guess the question is, are those people truly happy in that scenario? And maybe some are. Everyone's unique, but I think a lot of us aren't. A lot of times with stuff like that, like if I'm thinking about work, where it's like a work setting where it's like, I don't want to think, I just want to be told what to do. It's because I don't value the work I'm doing. Right? I'm not passionate about what I'm doing. I just want to get in, collect a paycheck, and go home so I can do what I am passionate about. And I do want to make decisions about what I am passionate about.
Thank you. That's all the questions from the chat. Does anyone have any other questions for Brad?
So has this helped you find your happiness? I mean, I know you've talked about these exercises and stuff like that. How do you feel today? Do you feel like you're using this to become a happier person?
I do. One of the things that I enjoy is sharing. So I'm doing that. But I mean, I would be lying if I said I feel happy every second of every day. And I don't think that's the point. Like, if you never feel sad, then how can you feel happy or how can you appreciate it? But I do find overall these things do help me. Sean Aker has a challenge. It's like 5 different things. And one of them's like journaling every day and that. And you're supposed to do it for like a month. I've never made it through the month of doing everything every single day because it's a lot. But even just a small amount of time of doing those things, I always feel a mood boost.
I mean, but do you go back and look at the book, like when you're feeling sad, to go find one of those things? I mean, my dad was a lawyer and he liked his job, but there were just days that were tougher than others. And one of the things I remember him telling me is he loved to go get his shoes shined. He said that just really just turned his day around. So little things like that, that's kind of an interesting take on it.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. One of the things that I started doing is I'm starting to feel really like frustrated or down. I tend to find that I get tired and then I just want to sit in my chair, but I will force myself to get up and go for a walk.
The other question I have too, and sorry, I didn't want to hog the time. Do you find that you are more of an introvert or an extrovert? And do you find that when you're, because like me, I think I'm an introvert, but I can fake extrovert very well. But those things I think, cause me to have anxiety too. Or I just get burnt out and I need time away to recharge before I can come back in and find that happiness again.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the misconceptions about like an introvert and an extrovert. People tend to think that introvert means I don't like people. And it's not that I don't like people. I still have a need to socialize and interact. But instead of energizing me in the moment, it wears me down. It uses energy. But overall, the more I interact with people, the better I feel. So I definitely noticed that, like, especially during the pandemic, right, where I'm like, at first I was like, this is great. Like, screw people. I'm by myself. I can be a hermit. But then after a while, you do notice it starts affecting you. And so being able to go out and have a conversation face to face with friends and then go home and recharge, I tend to feel better overall. But I'm very much an introvert.
Brad, I have a question. Following up on that about the pandemic, when we're all at home, has there been any studies that you're familiar with to check like the happiness or lack of stress? People in office or out of office or hybrid. And when we did shut down, I was one of those people that I wanted to get back into the office because I started to hate my home office. But it was no longer safe. It was, I had to work. I went in there to work, not enjoy myself. So I think it added a lot more stress than
Yeah.
I wonder if there's anything quantifiable on the stress levels in remote or in office.
It's hard because there was also a pandemic going on at the same time, and there was a lot of other stressors. So yeah, there was research that showed we were more stressed. I could only like correlate things, like correlate research to it, which some of this, that's what it is, right? Different research pairing it together. So like we tend to have certain reactions and feelings to certain environments, right? And you see that a lot with kids. And kids know the rules at home, and as soon as they leave home, it's completely new environment, so completely new rules in their head, and so they'll act differently. And so, like when we go into work, we're like, "All right, I'm here to work. I'm in work mode." When I come home, it's like, "All right, I'm home. I'm in home mode." And when you work from home all the time, those lines tend to blur. So there's definitely that, as well as just like the lack of social interaction. I know there was some stuff about context switching. There's some people, they would go for a walk at the beginning of the day, and at the end of the day, as like their, transmute to work to kind of break up the day. I know a guy that during work hours, he wears shoes, and then as soon as his work day is done, he takes his shoes off to signal that shift. So I do think that there is some correlation with it, and it's going to depend on the person.
Well, thank you so much, Brad. It's been really wonderful having you here with us today. And we'll get this, the session was recorded, so we'll get this up to our YouTube channel and then with your resources sent out to everyone. So thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Have a nice day, everyone.